Welcome everyone, this is On Just Restart, and this time we're going to be talking about the role for Princess Zelda in Breath of the Wild 2. What exactly is going on here? We're not sure, that's why we're going to be speculating on it in this video. But in the final trailer, or the most recent trailer I should say, we see Zelda fall down this hole. It could be an attempt at subversion here, maybe it's not the case, but it does seem like Zelda will not have an active role in the story. That's what the falling down seems to imply. Either she dies, which would be very dark, and we know Breath of the Wild 2 is going to be a very dark game, but more likely, she's simply going to be the damsel in distress again. That's what the idea seems to be suggesting. But as I said earlier, this could be an attempt at subversion. Maybe that's what they're sort of trying to suggest right now, only to sort of flip that around and have Zelda have a different role. Maybe she will be playable. Maybe she'll simply have a strong active role of the story. We are not sure. So we're going to be kind of looking into this situation right now and trying to sort of come to some sort of idea of what would make sense for Princess Zelda and her role in Breath of the Wild 2. Now before we jump into things, let me very quickly talk about my social media. You may see a few different things here on screen. You can check that all out. It is linked in the description below. And of course, if you like what you're seeing here, you can subscribe. If we go back to the initial Breath of the Wild trailer, at the time we just knew of it as Zelda U, there is quite a bit of speculation and debate as to who that character was that was shooting the arrow at the Guardian. Now we obviously know that it's Link, but not everyone thought that back then. A lot of people were arguing that the character looked very androgynous or potentially feminine, perhaps a female, perhaps either a female Link or Princess Zelda in disguise. There was a lot of debate back then, and it created a bit of a stir. Eiji Aonuma even commented on all of the buzz regarding a female playable lead in The Legend of Zelda, and he found it to be interesting. Now I'm paraphrasing here, but the point is, there is certainly a fascination then, and there still probably is a fascination now. A lot of people are a fan of Princess Zelda, or at least some people would like to see perhaps a little bit of a change of pace and see a female lead in a Zelda game. Now me personally, Link has always been the main character for the Zelda games, and because of that, I'm okay with it being Link because he's always been that main character, but Princess Zelda is Zelda, the entire name of the series. It is The Legend of Zelda. She should have a prominent role, a strong role, and if there were to be a Zelda game where she were to be made playable, even potentially being the lead, I wouldn't be opposed to that either. That could be a very interesting take. If it's either done in the mainline games or if it's done in some sort of cool spin-off, that would be interesting to see for sure. So when we take a look at Breath of the Wild 2, there is definitely potentially some hints towards something like that. With the first trailer, we do see Zelda sort of exploring this underground sort of cave tomb with Link, and she seems to have more of a sporty look, as a lot of people have argued, because her hair is now shorter, although it could just be a haircut. But the point is, she's exploring with Link. We don't get to see this too much in Zelda games. They are together, working together to find out what's going on underground Hyrule here. And it seems to be perhaps an expansion on the idea that was presented at the end of Breath of the Wild 1. At the end of the game, the final sort of secret cutscene, Zelda talks about how Link and Zelda need to work together to restore Hyrule and perhaps bring it back to its former glory or even beyond. And then we see them headed towards trying to potentially fix Vah Ruta. At the very least, I feel like it's safe to say that within the lore for Breath of the Wild, before the events of the Calamity, Link and Zelda throughout all the flashbacks were traveling alongside of each other, getting things done. And in between the end of Breath of the Wild 1 and Breath of the Wild 2, Link and Zelda are traversing the land together, getting things done. So it would be kind of a shame to see Zelda not be getting anything done in Breath of the Wild 2, but it would match up with previous Zelda games where Zelda has mostly been a damsel in distress. However, it's not always the case that she is simply a damsel in distress. She's had active roles in the past, and sometimes they're very strong roles. In Twilight Princess, Zelda made a sacrifice for Midna, and at the end of the game, she was fighting Ganondorf alongside of you. So Zelda was definitely a very strong character back in Twilight Princess. And then if you take a look at Skyward Sword, she has her own adventure alongside Impa throughout the game. Now it's mostly off screen, but at the end of the game you do get to see a bit of her adventure with the closing credits. Zelda didn't just do anything, she had a prominent role with the events of the game, but given that you're Link, you only really see what's going on with Link. Zelda's role is mostly just for cutscenes and lore. She's not really a part of the gameplay. People want her to be part of the gameplay. Will that happen this time around? Well, when we go to the second trailer for Breath of the Wild 2, it potentially suggests otherwise, because Zelda just falls down a hole. And considering the entire history of the series, maybe that's it. We're just not going to see her playable. But if that's the case, if she's not playable, that doesn't mean she can't have an active role with the story. And it doesn't mean we can't see her throughout the game. So let's say she does fall down this hole. Does that mean she's just completely out of commission? Maybe, but it also could mean a whole bunch of other things. Perhaps Zelda could have her own adventure as well. And if she is having her own adventure, there is that possibility that they could explore her having some gameplay options. But if I have to be totally clear with you, I don't think that that's the direction they would go, because Breath of the Wild is all about being open and having open exploration, having that freedom. So if Link is definitely a playable character, as we've seen with the footage, then to have a situation where you would sometimes play as Zelda, that might take away from that freedom a little bit, because you wouldn't be able to go wherever you want. But maybe just the occasional scripted sort of moments, or you have some sort of small segments where you play as Zelda and then you go back to Link. Maybe that could be happening within some of the big sort of plot points of the game, potentially. Or maybe it's a situation where, yes, she will not be playable, but as you progress throughout your adventure and you accomplish certain great tasks, perhaps beating certain dungeons that build up your sword or what have you so you can eventually defeat Ganondorf, when you do a certain amount of those things, you get sort of a flashback or like a vision connecting yourself to Zelda and see what she's going through. Maybe she is still having an adventure and figuring things out on her own. Maybe that's what's going on here. Or maybe her role will have a lot more to do with the restoration of Hyrule, and she's going to be recruiting people or finding things and bringing it all back, and maybe that's going to play into a huge sort of set of side quests that you do throughout Breath of the Wild 2. How will this sort of all connect together when she's in the bottom of some sort of dark cavern underground Hyrule, and how will that all relate to towns and villages and such being restored in the surface of Hyrule? That I don't know. Maybe she gets out. Maybe we see her have her own adventure, and then later into the game she does make it back to the surface. Then she has a role in restoring Hyrule. Perhaps that could be the case, and we could actually interact with her throughout the game as we're doing these different side quests to restore Hyrule. If we go back to Breath of the Wild 1, there was this awesome side quest that was all about building up a town and bringing people into it. It was all about Terry Town, and that was very exciting. But a lot of people have speculated, myself included, that perhaps this could be sort of like a great sort of example for what they could do for Breath of the Wild 2. There is this need to restore Hyrule, rebuild civilization. What if there's a lot more of Terry Town-like side quests throughout the game, where you're literally building up towns and villages and cities, bringing in more characters, interacting with them, figuring out what makes them tick, figuring out how their relationships work together, and sometimes saving them or just fixing whatever's going on with them. And what you're in is a situation where there are just tons and tons of towns and villages all throughout Hyrule, and it just offers a lot of side quest gameplay. That would be exciting, especially because I feel like compared to other open world games, if Breath of the Wild were to pale in comparison in any way, it would be the side quests. It had some good ones, but I feel like there could have been more. What if the side quests feel very Majora's Mask-like? That would be amazing. Granted, there's a lot of work to be done there, but this game is also taking a very long time. Maybe Nintendo this time around really wants to convey the idea of a living, breathing, believable world of Hyrule that includes tons of characters that connect with each other, communicate with each other, and have their own places to live. And Zelda's going to play a pivotal role in building that all up. Maybe that's the direction they're going in. Or maybe this whole side quest idea is not at all going to happen, right? And what happens is that simply Zelda is working on her own to build up her own power so she can help Link to defeat Ganondorf. What's interesting about Breath of the Wild 2 compared to Breath of the Wild 1 is that we're looking at a situation where perhaps we may actually see the return of the 3 different parts of the Triforce. The Triforce of Power from Ganondorf, the Triforce of Courage from Link, and the Triforce of Wisdom from Zelda. In Breath of the Wild 1, we didn't really see much of the Triforce until the very end of the game when Zelda made one last large effort to seal away Calamity Ganon. And that was it. It wasn't like her Triforce of Wisdom, it was just like the whole Triforce. In most Zelda games, when you have Link and Ganondorf and Zelda, these 3 different parties that are important to the main story, they each have a third of the Triforce. In Breath of the Wild, we did not see Link with the Triforce of Courage at all, and Ganondorf isn't really Ganondorf in Breath of the Wild 1, it's just Calamity Ganon. He's more of a natural disaster as opposed to this persona. But in Breath of the Wild 2, we have a persona, we have this mummy-like creature that is resurrecting that is presumably Ganondorf. And based off the first trailer, how we see the cave paintings of him traversing and waging war with his trident and having men behind him on horses, and that one flash with the silhouette of him having more of a burly form, it does seem that they are building up something here to tell a story about Ganondorf. In other words, there's going to be a personality here, there's going to be a history here, and he's going to have an identity that is more than just this force of nature, and that, I think, is very suggestive that we could see the return of the Triforce of Power. And with the return of the Triforce of Power also comes the Triforce of Courage for Link and Wisdom for Zelda. For Link, there has already been a fair bit of speculation that this all-greens-like sort of energy could be related to the Triforce of Courage, and perhaps he is building that up and proving himself in these Sky Islands as the true hero worthy of the Triforce of Courage. Maybe he has to collect those different Triforce pieces to have the full power of courage at the end of the game to fight Ganondorf, and that's what's sort of going on there. But then meanwhile, Zelda has to restore her own powers, because at the end of Breath of the Wild 1, she makes mention that she no longer has the ability to hear the voice within the sword, Fi. So what if she's lost her powers, and she can't really do that much right now? She doesn't seem to be that capable in Breath of the Wild 2's first trailer, because she kind of just falls down a hole. She doesn't use any of her goddess powers to save herself or combat anything that's going on here. So it does seem to be the case that she's lost her powers, but maybe not for good, because she's Zelda. Why would she just lose her powers forever? Maybe she has to build them back up. Maybe it is related to that 100-year slumber and she has to restore them again. And perhaps her adventure is all about restoring her powers and reawakening herself as a goddess once more, and she can use her Triforce of Wisdom to get things done at the end of the game alongside Link to defeat Ganondorf, maybe once and for all. I think there's a possibility of that. And I want to bring up Skyward Sword again, because there's been a lot of discussion about how Skyward Sword could be relating to Breath of the Wild 2 in some way, or perhaps various ways, and we discussed that on the channel already. But perhaps another way could be how Skyward Sword has perhaps the best conveyed version of Zelda ever. She has so much personality, she has an active role with the beginning of the game, and throughout the game, within the lore, within the story, she's actually doing quite a bit. She's adventuring around with Impa, getting things done, building up her powers because she plays an active role with this whole situation regarding demise and repelling the evil. Maybe Nintendo wants us to play through Skyward Sword HD to acquaint us with different ideas, perhaps acquainting us with the idea of dungeons, perhaps acquainting us the idea with lofting, so perhaps they could be playable and flyable through the sky. But perhaps also they want to sort of acquaint us to the idea of Zelda having a more prominent role. Skyward Sword teases it. Maybe with Breath of the Wild 2, they fully execute this idea and we see Zelda getting things done throughout the game. Whether that's through the gameplay, through the story, hard to say right now, because Nintendo just decided to show us Zelda falling down through a hole. But I feel like something's gotta go on here, because she can't just fall down a hole and that just be it. I really doubt that they'll just kill her off just like that. There's gotta be more to it than just that. But what is it? Well, we don't know yet, but let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Anyways, everyone, this is On Just Restart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care.